This is The Change Physician, episode 202.
Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Change Physician podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my amazeballs, somewhat tired-looking co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady.
Do I look tired?
You look a little tired. I think you're
a little peckish? Is that the right word?
No, I don't think peckish is the right name, because I think peckish means irritated. I don't see you necessarily. Are you irritated?
I don't know. Irritated? See, this is what happens on the Change Physician. I help change people or change myself because I look up a word that I think I know and I don't. Oh, apparently it means hungry. Well, I am a little peckish.
I always think about peckish as kind of being irritated, and
maybe hangry.
I guess peckish is almost the hangry, the old age hangry,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
Because we all get hangry.
Yeah.
For this particular episode, a couple of weeks ago off channel, we were talking about some of the things that we were thinking about doing, particularly in the next 200. And this little thing popped out that I had to write it down. And it was this idea of things that changed us, like things that changed you, because there are movies that changed. I'm going to use the word you, but in either one of us, books that have changed you, people that have changed you, or even places that have changed you. And some of those we've talked about before, and some of them may be a business book or maybe a psychological book. And we've done some book reviews in the past, but there are also the things that are not necessarily as tangible that have changed us as well. And I thought of two, but I only want to talk about one. And for the audience out there, if you have something that has changed you, like something that you would think, I can't believe this actually changed me as much as it did. That could have been a high school trip that you did to Washington, D.C. Maybe you went to Europe when you were 15, or I don't know, whatever. But when we had discussed this again a couple of weeks ago, one of the first things I did is I thought about this. And this is an old box, and you guys this weird looking art on here. And I remember when I bought this book, actually these three books, because there's three, it's a trilogy, and in this box set, and I hated the art, the graphic on it, and I almost didn't buy it because of that, because I used to buy a lot of books by their covers, but I was kind of intrigued on what the story was. And so this is the Sword of the Spirits trilogy. It was published. So mine is from 1980, this box set. I think it was a little bit before there. John Christopher wrote also another series that I really enjoyed called the Tripod series that used to be published in like a Boy Scout magazine or something. I can't remember how I used to read it. And really that was an interesting series. But this Sword of the Spirits, and the reason I bring this up is this was a post-apocalyptic novel that was set sometime in the future, that there had been sort of this cataclysmic change. And on the United Kingdom, on the island of Britain, the people through this catastrophe blamed it on technology. And so they had reverted to almost this sort of medieval society, like this of nations of city-states. And then there was a lot of mutations because of like radioactivity and whatever happened in the world. The cataclysm was never actually explained. So there was a lot of mutations. And so they had actually lower class. If you had a deformity, you were like a serf, like you were a second class citizen and treated as such. But the reason that this book series, and the reason I still have it, even though I haven't touched it, is it made me think a lot about a number of different things. They introduced this idea of inequity. So you're treating people because they look different. And these obviously, some of these were deformities, sometimes as simple as having an extra pinky, and that immediately made you a serf. There was aspects of relationships, like the prince guy ends up marrying somebody as sort of an arranged marriage. And then there's betrayals with his best friend, revenge. And this idea of is what is the purpose of vengeance? If you've been wronged, does that serve a point? And then ultimately it was one of the first books I've ever read that the end wasn't happy. And I remember like, what is happening here? Because it ends at this book. I mean, there's this whole big thing that happens, and he's trying to kind of gets kicked out of he becomes a prince of his city and gets kicked out because he's not doing a really good job. Kind of goes crazy because of this aspect with his wife and his best friend. Or not, I shouldn't say crazy, but this produces such a backlash in society that they push him out, and then he goes and he gets some people, and then they come back to take over the city. And I just remember the ending, because he talked about it. What ultimately happens is he, with the father of his wife, he goes to her and says, your daughter wronged me and you need to help me. And the daughter, like, and so the king whose daughter is like, yeah, right, we can't have that happening. And they go and they basically are bombarding. So they use technology that they're not supposed to use, develop cannons, and they're pounding his old city that he grew up in. And the end of it happens is one of his old friends comes out and is like, hey, what are you doing? Like, you're killing the city. He's like, I'm taking over the city. He's like, we can take the city, but we're all going to die. And you should look. And so they used some glasses, and they looked up on the wall where they're pounding with these cannons, and all these people are there. They all start coming up and they stand on the edge of the wall. So that if you're going to shoot them, if you're going to break down the walls, you're going to kill all these people. And then that changes him. He goes back and ultimately he never marries. And he's just like, I have this special thing that was made and blah, blah, blah. It would have gone to my heir. And the last line's, but I'll never have an heir. It's just like, it just still like gets me so worked up, because you have these books. It's like, oh my God. I think I was 8. I was 8 when I read this thing.
How many times did you read it?
3.
Oh.
And, but the themes, it still gets you, So this is one of those little silly things, but I think it's interesting to think of small innocuous things like a book that has these little silly themes about love, betrayal, friendship, vengeance, inequity. That I don't know if that was entirely his purpose, but it really had a fundamental impact on how I perceive the world. And how I perceive the world and who I am, because of this stupid little book series that I read when I was 8 years old.
Yeah, but it emphasizes the power of words and story, and how you create and construct in your mind, especially when it doesn't go the way you maybe had hoped.
And that may be one of the keys there, because it was one of those things that basically said, the world isn't perfect. And you may want a story, all these happy fairy tales, they lived happily ever after. They didn't live happily ever after, at least in this book. And that was sort of like, holy crap, things can happen and people aren't living happily ever after. And that occurs in a fiction book. So maybe in the real world, there's more that we need to be kind of aware of with this stuff. Yeah, super.
So how do you think that changed you? Do you think it changed you, or do you think you just remember it?
Well, I think it had to have changed me, because I do remember it, right? If you, and that's one of the things about memory. If something is struck in your memory fairly vividly, then there's a reason for it. And it more likely is going to have influenced all subsequent behavior since that point, right? Because memory is integral to learning. And I think from my standpoint, and why it did change me, is it did make me recognize that there are such things as not happy endings. Specifically, maybe in the book sense, in a fiction world, you can actually have stories that aren't happy. But in real life too, you can do everything right and things may just not turn out the way that you wanted them to. And I think some of the, now I'm thinking about this, the other really interesting thing was relationships, because this kind of core relationship starting in about book 2, where he meets the daughter of this king of this other land or whatever, and and she's this beautiful princess and she's amazing and she does all this stuff, and he's like, oh, and he gets married to her, and he just assumes that everything's going to be happy there, but he doesn't do anything. And then he comes running around and he's busy all the time, so he never really establishes a relationship with his wife, who then his best friend, and they become involved, kind of a deal. But the betrayal, if you kind of think about it from foundationally, but the betrayal occurred when he took for granted what he had and didn't put any work into it, right? Because she didn't have any choice into marrying him, and she didn't necessarily want to marry him, but her dad kind of told her he had to marry him. And I think she said as a dutiful daughter, like she didn't say I didn't want to marry him at all, but she decided to do it. But then he didn't actually put any work into it. And I think for me, that was another kind of insight into relationships take work.
Mhm.
And you know, I don't remember reading this and getting so frustrated because he was so mad. He's all mad. And I'm like, well, you were a dork. I mean, you were a total dickhead at times, and you were not like, you didn't do anything. And like, why don't you just say, I'm sorry here? And you wouldn't say, you know, all this stuff. So I think it did impact me again on the not happy side, but also on the other side is being really paying attention to relationships, and that first recognition that a lot of the stuff that can develop and build happens when we are not willing to recognize mistakes, and certainly not willing to put work into something, not willing to say I'm sorry, and not take ownership of the things that we do when they don't turn out right. Like if he had taken ownership and said, hey, you were right, I was wrong. You were right, I wasn't spending time with you. You were right, I want to try to make things work. Instead, his reaction was, I'm going to imprison, you know, you betrayed me, and I'm going to put him in jail, and I'm going to cut his head off. You know, that doesn't work in post-apocalyptic novels, and it tends not to work in these elements when there's relationships.
So I'm curious, at 9 years old, I'm assuming you didn't really think these thoughts in this way, and it was a feeling or a sense of it. And I want to know, when did you read them again? What were your ages roughly?
I don't know. I
Teenager,
20s. I read it when I was 8 to 10-ish. And then I probably read them in the next year or two for sure, and probably within there. So through adolescence as into preteen kind of stuff as well. And but I do think that kind of the ideas of relationships, for whatever reason, I may not have been thinking about total romantic relationships, although maybe I was. I think I was aware of that stuff a lot earlier because, you know, people have like, I had my first girlfriend when I was in kindergarten, like, and we didn't, obviously you don't do anything, but Nicole, I knew there was something special about her, and I took my little spaceship and we sat in, I don't know, she even came to one of my birthday parties. So I guess I was kind of aware of these interpersonal relationships pretty early on. And the other part is I think it reflected because as you get older and you see like friends and the drama that goes in high school and this, that, and the other thing, I never was someone who would, just because their friend decide that they were right. It probably didn't make me super happy. People are happy around me all the time because they've been coming. So why are you? How come you're not mad at such and such? And I'm like, I can't exactly be mad at them because I've seen what you do. You know, and it's like, and so I think has been kind of a key factor for a lot of the things. I don't. The bond of quote unquote loyalty in and of itself does not always, the context also is important to me as well.
Yeah, but you value truth, so sometimes truth hurts. And
truth, yeah, she's a brutal mistress, man. Yeah.
So I can see how that could be a challenge. But,
yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, we don't have to talk about this forever, but I wanted to
but show the book again. So
again, this is
because we don't talk fiction all the time.
No, but and I was thinking, because most of the books that we reviewed have been nonfiction books, but there are some fiction books. And that's what made me think. I'm like, okay, what fiction books have had a huge impact on my life? This was one, and I think this one had the biggest thought involved. Like I have a lot of other fiction books I've kept because I just love the books. But the reason I kept these, even though I still can't stand the art, I mean, it just annoyed. I don't like, it's kind of creepy. Was because the ideas within the books, those ones really impacted me in such a way beyond just like, oh, that's such an amazing story. There was so much more there. It just made me think. I don't know. Have you ever had a fiction book do that to you? And I don't want to go into a whole episode, but because I think I don't know.
I really can't. Nothing pops in my head because I've been I only remember The Invisible Man when I was reading that in high school. But I mean, I don't remember too much of it, but something resonated with me in there. But I think the whole point to this conversation is we're the Change Physician podcast, and we're so wired to read nonfiction because of knowledge and wanting to know. You need to know and be the teacher, you're the doctor, you want to help people. And we think that we have to read nonfiction to learn what we need to learn. But what I've struggled with, and I know I need to do better at, is fiction has lessons there too, and probably more so in the realm of relationships and the things that maybe some of us are not putting as much time into. I could speak for myself, or can improve upon, I should say. So I guess there's a lot of value, and books can change you, not just personal development nonfiction books.
Yes, books can change you. Movies can change you. Places can change you. Yeah. So I don't know if for the listeners out there, if you find this interesting, I would be very interested in hearing things that have changed you, whether that is a book, a place, a person, or a thing. Yeah, person, place, or thing. Just email me at drkevin@thechangedphysician.com. I would be really interested. I'm sure there's some people. That would be we could have a whole series on that. People that have changed you.
Mm-hmm.
Because that one resonates too, is people. Oh yeah. What about that? Oh, that person. If it hadn't been for that person, my life could have been completely different. So, some good. I think a good point to discussion. Good to discuss, and hopefully people can pull out. Again, there's the importance. Well, when we talk about people, the importance of what you do and how those small things ripple out, but also these may seem like silly books, but they can really have an impact on somebody. These little things. So.
They're not so little anymore, and they're not so, superficial, or, you said, oh, it's just a little bitty book.
I've kept around and called through multiple states, and still have them downstairs in my house right now.
Yeah. Well, to kind of summarize, you never know what can change you. Words and stories can be powerful. You never know who you're impacting. Speaking of which, in a podcast, you never know who's listening. We'd like to know, but sometimes you don't realize the impact we're having on people. Of course, we'd love to hear about that too. But if you don't know what the Change Physician is all about, go to thechangephysician.com. You can join us there in the community, whether you're a physician or physician ally, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Stay well, folks.